And good evening, everybody, and welcome to this week's Maternity and Midwifery Hour. This is Series 15, Session 11. My name's Sue Macdonald, and I'm the curator for this hour, the Maternity Hour, and the Maternity and Midwifery Festivals. And it's my pleasure to be chairing this evening. And I'm joined by two midwife doctors. I love to say that because it's such a delight to me. We've grown so many midwives into doctors as well. So that's really lovely from a midwife's point of view. And we're joined by, Dr. Denise Tiran and Dr. Gina Finnerty, and welcome to both of you. Thank you for
Thank you.
giving up your evening to us, because I know this is going to be very exciting, very interesting for everybody who's watching. But before we do get to that, the meat of the matter, can you share your moment of the week? Because I know there's midwives and student midwives out there who really want to know what your moment of the week is. So should we start with Denise?
Oh, hi, everybody, and thank you, Sue. My moment of the week is turning a negative into a positive. So, since Monday, I have had technology hell in my house with no internet for 2 days. So, I was rather panicking for this
No.
evening. And it all transpired, it was due to a telephone line that a lorry had broken and it was hanging loose with cables. But I managed to do a variety of other things. I managed to think about how else I could use technology. I rescheduled some meetings, and panic turned into bliss, shall we
Oh,
say. So I
wow.
did have a little bit of extra time yesterday, and I've been able to
Wow.
catch up again today.
And once you got over the stress, did you get the stress headache afterwards?
A little bit, but it was okay. It was
Oh
okay.
gosh. Well, that makes a very good story for cables hanging after being run over by a lorry. Now, Gina, you're going to have to beat that one.
Hi everyone. So my moment of the week really was going to a my first ever um, open mic in a pub. So I just wandered into this pub because I heard this calypso music, and what struck me was how it was very good fun, but also it was so inclusive, and that was a really good eye opener, and it warmed me for the week,
Okay. Now,
basically.
Gina, was this
Lovely.
singing or talking?
I did not do anything.
Oh,
I'm quite microphone phobic, so no, I
oh,
didn't do
okay.
anything. Listening.
Okay. Okay. Well, next time, perhaps.
No.
That'd be something to look forward to. So thank you so much for sharing your moments of the week. Now we're just going to let our speakers have a little rest before we start getting them to do their work. And I'm just going to say another welcome to you. I know we'll have some people who come every week, and I know we've got some new people registered tonight. So welcome to you. You may or may not know that the Midwifery and Maternity, or Maternity and Midwifery Hour, was born on the first UK lockdown for COVID-19. And it was a way that we developed to make sure we had a 1 hour a week where midwives, student midwives, anyone in maternity services actually, because we did have quite a few neonatologists, and we had quite a few maternity care support workers and mums joining us. We could come and connect, learn a little bit more around maternity services and midwifery. And initially, we did a lot on COVID. We did a lot on COVID, the effects of COVID on the services and what people were doing, which was really so fascinating because midwives did some absolutely fabulous work at that time. And I have to say, I was bowled over by some of the work that came out of that, not just in the maternity services, but also in education, where midwives had to kind of juggle around with the curriculum to make sure students got their training but were safe, got their clinical experience and were safe. So especially this week, I think, because I've seen a documentary at the beginning of the week about COVID, which was very moving, and it kind of reminded me of all the scarediness and fear that was around, and what people did to keep others safe, to look after other people. And I think anyone who was around at that time, you should all have a pat on the back for everything you did at that time. So well done, you all. Now, the other thing is just to say everything that the Maternity and Midwifery Forum do is recorded. So if you have, say you have a lorry come by and just rip out your TV cable or your computer cable, or you have a power cut, you will be able to catch up with this because we record everything and you can access it through Matflix. And that Matflix link is in the resources list, which you should have access to because we did it earlier. There's lots of lovely references there. And there's also wonderful books from Denise, nice list for there. And you can access all of those things as you wish. You don't have to, but I think you might find it a bit addictive when you do. So have a look at it later. The other thing is do share. And I think this evening, and in fact, I say this a lot, most evenings we do, really interesting. You will find it something in here really helpful for your life as a midwife or a student midwife. So do share with other colleagues. Now, this is especially if you're doing your revalidation as a midwife, really handy to do this because you can kind of include it as your reflection in keeping up to date and sharing with your professional colleagues. But it's also helps you kind of, well, it certainly helps me if I learn something new to share with my friends and colleagues because I kind of think it through and really understand what I've learned. So it's really helpful to do that. So do share. We did in the old, I seem to remember the olden days when we had the English National Board, we used to have a special number and you had to keep it all secret because you had to go to the event in order to prove you're keeping up to date. But we're very open to sharing and learning together. So do share. No, I haven't got much in the news. I know there's been a report from the Nottingham Maternity Services, and I know from the CQC, and it was a little bit delayed, and they've actually said there have been improvements, which is great. I know it's really hard when people are under review, and it's hard to kind of get things really improved. It's kind of like battling as you're going. So well done for those. I know that the Ockenden review is still underway, and the Ockenden reviews have been very helpful, painful because they're telling us things that we really need to address as practitioners and really need to highlight in what we do. But it's and that's I think later on in the year coming out. Now, what was also interesting to me, and this is me weaving around looking at things recently, there's been 2 analyses which I've been very interested. I've also put them on the resources sheet. Now, there's been a recent analysis, and this was, I think, in the Mail Online. And their sort of title was the 10 trusts having the highest number of preventable birth injury claims. And this is obviously being used by legal people for obvious reasons. But there's a kind of list of places who've got high rates of claims. But of course, some of them are big units where they're more likely to be more complex births, difficulties with babies' outcomes and things. But also, I found it interesting, having looked at that, to look then at the Channel 4's news, and it's called the NHS maternity units with the most missing midwives, and it's a fact check. And it's quite a short piece, but it's well worth looking at because that made me think about there's awful lot of midwives missing, and some of that is because we're losing midwives as they're retiring, and some of them aren't being replaced very quickly. And also it's quite a hard job to do. So we need to keep hanging on to our good midwives and really making sure we're looking after them, which is part of what we're doing this evening. But it was interesting to me that some units have got a 10% lack of midwives. Some have got 60% lack of midwives. And how can you function fully, comfortably in that sort of environment? It kind of I've been thinking about it for a couple of days. So have a look at it and think about where you're working and what your reduction is. And, are you short of midwives and how could you make things better? And that's focused, I think, more on England than the whole of UK, but it has resonance for wherever you're working, because I know that the state of the International Confederation of Midwives did a big report of the whole world's midwives, and there's nearly 1 million, I think I'm right, nearly 1 million shortage of midwives. We are a precious resource. So we need to look after ourselves and we need to look after our teams and our students and all the people we work with. So this is a really good time to be looking at stress, burnout, and ensuring your well-being, because it's really important. It's interesting to me that sometimes in some places you can be very stressed and have a very hard work, too many things to do, and yet if you've got a good team, you can cope with it. And that's I mean, if I think back to my own life at certain places. So I'm going to say now our speakers, and it's exactly 7:10, so I'm going to go on to my first speaker, and that's Gina Finnerty, who I'm delighted to introduce. I'm going to say that both CVs are online, and actually these are edited highlights. So Gina is currently a visiting fellow in the Institute for Life Course Development at the University of Greenwich, very experienced midwife and educator. She's a particular interest in the senior workforce, coaching and knowledge exchange. She's also recently launched a website. I love this thing, themasterfulmidwife.com. And this is she's hoping to host some restorative day retreats for frontline NHS midwives. I love the sound of that. Let's all sign up for that now. But welcome, Gina. Thank you so much for coming. The screen is now yours.
Thank you, Sue. That's great. I think what you've said about the vacancy rates is really, really troubling, isn't it? So this is just a quick cook's tour, really. Obviously, it's a sensitive subject, so there are some sort of resource and things at the end, and also in the forum website. I'll just move on. So as an introduction, really, the previous article that I wrote for the forum was addressing burnout and what can be learned really from other professions. And what came through from that for me was how far ahead the GPs are. So there's a very good group, it's called the Work Well Doctors, and they've got fantastic resources on the website around grief, dealing with grief, that sort of thing, nutrition, all sorts of really helpful things. And also, I think a significant positive thing that I found was neonatal nurses who had a sort of hub psychologist in their department, and it was not only good for the women and families, but also for the staff, and it improved retention of the staff nurses particularly. But for today, the focus is on well-being more generally, what we can learn from different cultures. And so I've taken for the example for today, Japan. And one of the reasons for that is I was really lucky to go on a fantastic study tour, midwifery study tour in 2023. And what Denise and I were discussing this yesterday, that really Japan has seen a significant growth of corporate wellness initiatives in the workplace and a really positive approach to well-being and work. So that's the reason for that. The baby in the photo was this beautiful second day born, and it was at a birth house that we were lucky to visit on the outskirts of Tokyo. So that was wonderful. And you can see the hands of both the parents there. So it's a really lovely photo. So just a bit of a backstory really for the impetus for all this. It came from just an article, Guardian article called The Coming Storm that a journalist wrote. And effectively it was taking texts from very burnt out and sort of intensive care consultants and frontline staff in the middle of the pandemic were writing in these texts to this helpline called Shout. And they were analysed by psychologists who could actually see very clearly that there was, moral injury, total burnout, moral distress, and all these things from bearing witness, but also PTSD type 2. So that led me, it was a very powerful piece, and it made me want to sort of, I don't know, help do something positive. So I contacted two occupational psychologists who just started at the university, and they were extremely open to doing some work on this, and we recognized that really burnout was a real, not burnout, sorry, debriefing was a real problem. It was not happening, and these staff were going home, you know, without being thanked or without being properly spoken to, and yeah, just asked how they were. So we then did a presentation at a psychology conference on voice and silence, hence the photo, the picture. And we got a team together of really good academics who wanted to be involved in this subject on debriefing, and published a systematic literature review as a team. And then I led a cross-faculty research cafe on resilience, and then from that, really, I suppose, I became interested in burnout in midwifery and the maternity services. One thing that's, I think, quite interesting that I've just updated, just done an extra literature search on this, is that and there's a group of anaesthetists, and they've devised an app for debriefing, which I think could be really exciting and usable. We could adapt it possibly in maternity care. This picture is actually, it's taken from an Oculus Rift headset for virtual reality. And so it's a picture of a tea ceremony room. And the image relates for me to, you know, work spaces, and really how unfit for purpose our clinical spaces actually are. And when I went back to practice just for a couple of years, just before the pandemic, you know, by the end of the 2 years, we had no office. There were 6 of us specialist midwives. We lost our office, and there were only 4 big desks in there. But, you know, I ended up in a cupboard with no window, and there was no changing room. There was no rest room for staff. There was nowhere for counselling, or the most important thing for me was handovers. Where do you do? It's such an important activity. So it just shows, doesn't it? But we just tolerated it. But in fact, it's not acceptable. It's not acceptable working conditions or culture, I would say. And you know, this is about using technology, but it's a really brilliant experience to go in and use this virtuality. It could be used for stress reduction, actually. So I've said that Japan's got this sort of movement really towards improving the workspaces, and employee health really is prioritised with actual work-life balance taken and put into policies. And for example, you know, they have 8-hour days maximum, 40-hour weeks maximum, and really flexible working is just normalised. Pilates at work classes, and you know, some places give a nutritious breakfast. There's quite family friendly policies, and Denise has visited very often, so she knows more than I do. But you know, for them in Japan, a healthy workforce means more productive and therefore more competitive as a business. I think they have some places have stress check programs and screening to combat burnout and stress at work. So the next slide is really about Kristen Neff's work around self-compassion. So she's written a paper. I was dying to find some data, but it is a little bit biased because it's she's analysing her own sort of program really, but it's called Theory, Method, Research and Intervention. And there's a 26 point sort of questionnaire, and I really sort of advise people to, some of you probably already have, but you get an immediate kind of result. So the 3 themes: self-kindness, common humanity and mindfulness, and then there are some sub-themes. So what Kristen Neff suggests is that self-compassion refers to being supportive towards oneself when experiencing suffering or pain. And she also suggests that it can be acquired and practiced, which we know, but her work does actually really support all of this. However, it is all self-reporting. And what she's also found through analysing the data from this is that greater self-compassion is actually linked to reduced psychopathology, you know, obviously things like depression. And it's more positive for well-being and increased self-esteem or sort of self-worth. So it is useful to do the test, I think. This is about trauma stewardship, which I hadn't really heard this term before. So Lipsky and Burke have written a book that really describes it well. And so they describe it as a daily practice, really about having much more self-awareness and caring for ourselves while we're caring for others. And the cartoon I couldn't really resist because it's not that clear, I'm afraid, but it's a pilot who's obviously got home from a flight and just having a cup of tea and chatting to his partner. And in the end, she just says, "Must you precede everything you say with 'this is your captain speaking'?" And the reason I've included it is because through the trauma stewardship book, there's a cycle that, you know, when you've been exposed to trauma in the workplace, that you often go through. And so one of the stages is like grandiosity. So you think everyone's relying on me, I can't possibly leave, I'm a very important person in this business, in this workplace. And I think the other couple of things it shows to me is that, you know, there's a work-life balance, and it's very hard to you know, it's very blurred, isn't it, often, and how important it is to have someone to listen to when you are, and you know, to give you a little bit of feedback. So anyway, the other thing I want to mention is that Kate Greenstock and Sally Pizarro have written, they're both senior midwives, and they've both written really good books. I'm just looking at the time, better flip through. This is about the retreats. This is the space that I've got set up. I am actually trying to seek funding because I don't believe midwives should have to pay. You've been burnt out from, you know, and exhausted from NHS work. And so I'm trying to get it so the days can be free or just pay minimum. And then you can contact me in the link below. And there's just then really, in conclusion, you know, we can see that Japan's investment in the workplace wellbeing programs is really, really gaining impetus. However, in the NHS, you know, I think we really do need urgent campaigns, improving the workspaces, develop evidence-based wellness initiatives, and prevent frontline maternity staff from experiencing stress, moral injury, and burnout, and really to ultimately improve outcomes and maternity care experiences for women, birthing people, and their families. And that's some references there. Well, I hope I haven't gone over time.
No, Gina, you're perfect.
Okay, I'll stop
You're
sharing.
perfect. Thank you so much. I didn't realize about Japan. That's so fascinating. And how sophisticated to do that, to really nurture your staff to that extent. Because it would be very interesting to know the costs that they balance out in terms of recruitment and retention. Be really fascinating. I dare say there is something around there about it, because they would be gathering data and evidence as well. So fantastic. Thank you so much, Gina. Well, we come back to you now. If anyone's got any queries about Japanese well-being and this sort of this was it 20-point questions? 20 points that you had to go through on that little quiz. Yeah.
26.
26. Okay. We'll need to know more about that. So if you have a question, pop it in the chat box and Paul will whiz it through to me, and then I'll look away to the screen at question time. So I'm going to now have my pleasure of introducing Dr. Denise Tiran, who's been on the program before. We love Denise. She's a great advocate of complementary therapies, and in fact, she's an international renowned authority on midwifery complementary therapies. Her company expectancy is now in its 20th year. I can't believe that. It can't be that long. That's amazing.
21, actually, 21.
Wow. Freedom of the city, I think. And this offers a unique range of courses for midwives in the UK and overseas. She holds an honorary doctorate from the University of Greenwich and the prestigious Royal College of Midwives Fellowship. She's undertaken several research studies, written numerous books, see resource list, and she's revised 6 editions of the world famous Balliers Midwives Dictionary. I used to carry that about in my pocket for years. And the Royal College of Midwives Complementary Therapy Guidelines for Midwives 2024. So welcome, Denise. The screen is now yours, and thank you so much for coming this evening.
Thank you so much for having me again. I always love doing these sessions, actually. I was fascinated by Gina's presentation. As she said, I've spent about 24 years teaching in Japan and also in China and Hong Kong and Taiwan and places. And the Far East is very much more interested in staff well-being and health. And, you know, when I first started going, I would be amazed that employers would take their staff out to lunch in a restaurant, or they would go to their staff weddings and funerals and things, because it was just part of what is the culture there. And they're very much into looking after one another. And yes, staff are very busy. And they do have quite long days. Some work longer than sort of eight hours, I would think. But it's just a lovely environment, and that they do appreciate you. And I think that is one of the things we need to work on a bit, because, you know, we don't always appear to be appreciating our staff. Maybe we do underneath it, but, you know. So what I'm going to talk about is a little bit about looking after yourself. Hopefully that's going to work. Yeah. So looking after yourself, really, with complementary therapies. But I want to put the focus on self-hypnosis this evening. And as some of you may know, if you've been on the session with me before, you know, I teach a range of different complementary therapies: aromatherapy, reflexology, hypnosis, acupuncture, and a variety of other things. But I think we're so engaged in trying to care for the families that we forget to care for ourselves, actually. And that is really important. I always say to my staff and to my students, think about what they say to you on the airlines. This is another flight reference, Gina. You know, please fix your own oxygen mask before helping anybody else. And that is so important. If we don't look after ourselves and we're not in the right frame of mind, we're not in the right state of health and well-being, we're overtired or stressed and fretful, then we're not going to be able to look after the families in our care. The problem is, of course, we probably all do know the sort of things we ought to be doing in order to look after ourselves. You know, eating well, getting plenty of exercise and fresh air, spending time with family, not smoking, not drinking as much, getting nice sleep and, you know, quality sleep and that sort of thing. But I'm not sure we actually do it. And many of us would say we don't have the time for that, we're too busy, or we're so stressed that we've gone past the point of being able to discipline ourselves to do some of these things. I think that the issue is, however, that looking after ourselves is essential. It's not something that should be viewed as a luxury. It's not selfish to be taking time for ourselves. It shouldn't be a chore, although sometimes I think people would say, you know, having to go to the gym or something is seen as a bit of a chore sometimes. Neither should it be the last thing on the list. And I think I am generalizing here, and I hope this isn't, you know, isn't going to upset people, but thinking of the traditional family where the woman is the sort of person who looks after the family and puts themselves last after the partner, the children, the cat, you know, or the dog. And actually, we have to put ourselves first sometimes, not all the time, but first sometimes, in order to look after all those other parts of our family life, our friends, and our work life, of course. Now, as you may know, complementary therapies like aromatherapy or reflexology, or going for a flotation tank experience, or doing yoga and Pilates, we know that many of those therapies have actually been evidence-based to show that if you have those therapies regularly, there is a reduction in cortisol, stress hormones, and you will feel better because you get an increase in endorphins and enkephalins. And of course, from a midwifery point of view, that will also lead to an increase in oxytocin. And this is what I often say about the use of complementary therapies in midwifery practice, that if you can help women through labour with complementary therapies, you're going to relax them, and that's going to help their oxytocin. But how can you do this? What can you do for yourself in between all that work that you're trying to do? Well, how about maybe treating yourself for a massage? Or if you don't want to go to somebody you don't know, or you can't afford it, or you don't want to spend the money on it, what about teaming up with a friend and having a nice evening where you do a little bit of hand massage on each other, maybe some foot massage, have a drink if you want it, have a chat, listen to some music, just take some time for yourselves. I think if you can, to go regularly for reflexology and aromatherapy, or go for exercise type therapies, then again, that will be very relaxing. And I do a lot of training for midwives leaving the NHS and going into private practice. And I say to them, it's not an expense that you should be paying for. Your business should be paying for it. It is something that you deserve, and it is something that you need in order to be caring for the clients you've got. If you're an independent midwife, or you're, in private practice offering complementary therapies or whatever. And then there are things like even acupuncture. We know that despite the fact that people think acupuncture is going to be painful, it isn't really. And in fact, often stimulates an endorphin release. So you might have gone in for perhaps treatment of your back pain, but you come out with a bit of a buzz because your endorphins are working hard. Then there's things like visualization and guided meditation. And those are sort of self-therapies similar to self-hypnosis. So one thing you could look at doing is learning how to do self-hypnosis. It's very easy to learn. It's fairly quick to do, and it can be quite relaxing. It's just about giving yourself a little bit of me time. It doesn't cost you any money. You can learn it from the internet, or you can learn it on a course, and then you set yourself down into a nice comfortable place, and you can use it as a tool to relax yourself, and do that fairly regularly, so that you do appreciate the difference between being stressed and being more relaxed, and then you can take that tool into your practice as well. Now, people might be thinking, well, I've heard all sorts of things about hypnosis, and it's where you go to these stage shows and somebody gets up and they're made to bark like a dog and run around the stage doing all sorts of things. Well, actually, that's not true. Stage hypnosis is very different. And there is the issue that if somebody volunteers themselves to go up on stage and be made to bark like a dog, they've already made a decision to contribute to that stage performer's hypnotic session. So if you go for therapeutic hypnosis, you're never going to be made to do things against your will. It's not a system of mind control at all. So if you want to go and relieve, let's say you want to stop smoking, or you want to lose weight, or you want to stop some behavioral habit of some sort, the therapist will work with you and will be very much focused on how to help you overcome the issues that you've presented with. People sometimes think it's dangerous. It isn't actually. When it's prescribed individually, it's supervised by a practitioner, and it's monitored, and people they've eliminated the contraindications and that sort of thing. It's not dangerous at all. It's actually a very good psychological tool that people can use they need to be trained properly. But self-hypnosis is such a simple thing that you can do for yourself. Now, clinical hypnosis then is inducing a trance-like state. It's a bit like what happens when you're driving the car every day to the same place and the car seems to make its own way. You don't have to think about it. And occasionally you think, well, where am I? Oh, I'm further than I thought I was going to be. But you had gone into a trance-like state, a sort of pre-sleep state, if you like. But at that point, a qualified practitioner would then be able to make various cues, suggestions for you that help with whatever you're wanting to achieve from having the hypnotic session, whether that is simply to have a better sleep pattern or it's something to deal with a particular issue of anxiety or phobias and that sort of thing. You are encouraged to focus your attention inwards. And, it is regulated. It's very well researched, actually. And it has been proven to have good neurophysiological effects. As with anything, there are always a few contraindications. So anybody who has an addictive personality, or they've got major mental health problems or emotional problems, maybe epilepsy that's active and they're frequently having fits and things, then those would be contraindications to having the treatment. But apart from that, it's a really simple and it's a very effective therapy to use if you go to a therapist. And then we can use it as well for ourselves. I just want to pause for a moment and explain the difference between clinical hypnosis and hypnobirthing. Midwives often say to me, well, I do hypnobirthing. Great, lovely, very good for helping parents prepare for the birth. Although I have to say, when I was a midwife in clinical practice, and we're talking nearly 50 years ago, a lot of what's in hypnobirthing is actually what we did as parent education, with relaxation sessions and guided imagery and education about what's going to happen and that sort of thing. So clinical hypnosis is definitely a clinical modality, and it is classified as a complementary therapy, unlike hypnobirthing, which is basically a set of tools and strategies for helping parents prepare for birth and work their way through labour and birth. Clinical hypnosis was actually derived by Anton Mesmer in the 1880s or something like that. We talk about being mesmerized, and that is the hypnotic state. But hypnobirthing was derived from the work of Grantley Dick Reed. And I'm sure, Gina and Sue, I'm sure we all remember being taught about Grantley Dick Reed when we were students, who basically adapted breathing techniques and visualization. And it is similar to hypnosis, but it isn't quite the same. In clinical hypnosis, you have a practitioner who guides you through the induction of the hypnotic state and delivers the cues, the suggestions for behavioral changes. Whereas in hypnobirthing, often it's delivered in groups where suggestions are given and people go home and practice them, and then they use them in labour. So there are some differences, and hypnobirthing isn't actually a complementary therapy. But what about self-hypnosis? It is really a very valuable tool to learn, because we know, it is evidenced, it will reduce stress hormones and it will raise your feel-good hormones. It will help with both getting to sleep and staying asleep. And one of the things when people are very stressed is they don't sleep well. They either struggle to get to sleep or they wake up frequently during the sleep. And I think if you're postmenopausal, that definitely gets worse, she says personally. It can also contribute to helping your confidence and your motivation. And I think that's so important for us as midwives and student midwives. Confidence is being eroded by a lot of the system, I think. And actually, if you don't have confidence, you won't necessarily have motivation. So this is where self-hypnosis you can almost feed your own cues in, your own suggestions to try and, make things better for yourself. It certainly doesn't take a lot of time, but it is best done on a fairly regular basis. Not necessarily daily, but every 2 or 3 days, have a little session, just sit there quietly. I remember once my ex-husband came home and I was sitting in the dark doing nothing. And he said, "What on earth are you doing?" Just sitting here. I'm just being, I'm just chilling. That's essentially what self-hypnosis can be. It's a time for you to chill, to regroup, to regain some of your joie de vivre and your passion, if you like. And actually, it can be very, very helpful. So finally, just to say to you that Expectancy, my company, we do have a wellbeing online course. So it's 2 days, and it goes through self-hypnosis. You practice some self-hypnosis. I will just tell you a little story, though, because my colleague was teaching the self-hypnosis course one weekend, and it was online during the pandemic, actually. And so you do your self-hypnosis, but one of the midwives was in her study at home, and her husband was doing the gardening. And he saw her sort of go into a somnambulant state. And he said, "Wake up." He was banging on the window saying, "Wake up, you're in a study day." But actually, she was legitimately relaxing through self-hypnosis. So we are offering a discount to the Maternity and Midwifery Hour participants if you want. But do contact me on expectancy.co.uk if you've got any questions or you want to join a course with us. Thank you very much.
Fabulous, Denise. Thank you so much. That's really interesting. I mean, it's interesting for the hypnosis and the hypnobirth, because I notice, and I know this from listening to you before, but some listeners may be unfamiliar with the way you talk about complementary therapies as treatments rather than just nice things to have done.
Yes, I mean, I think when in midwifery, it's really important that we look at why expectant parents might want complementary therapists. They don't come to us for complementary therapy. They come to us because they're pregnant or in labor or whatever, and they want a resolution to some of their problems. So they want us to treat their back pain or their nausea and vomiting, or help them prepare for birth and overcome anxiety and things. And that's where I see complementary therapists being of value, actually.
No, that's great. That was really great. We have had one question. I also have to give a special hello to Cheryl, who is going to be a newly qualified midwife and is about to start on the 7th of April and is joining us for the first time this evening. Hi, Cheryl. I hope you join us again. And she's come up with a question, and I have to say, people who join us for the Maternity and Midwifery Hour often have some fantastic questions and really participate well. So Cheryl, you're off to a good start. I'm assuming there aren't two Cheryls there. And so Cheryl says, "I wonder how effective hypnosis is with people with neurodevelopmental conditions."
Oh, that's a really interesting question, actually. Thank you for that. Obviously, it is something that is not a problem so long as an assessment has been done by the hypnotherapist and there are none of the contraindications. So each person is individually evaluated as being suitable for treatment or for teaching self-hypnosis. And the therapist would only take the treatment to the level that's appropriate for that person. And I think, I'm actually thinking of my daughter-in-law who has autism and is currently being investigated for ADHD. And hypnosis is a really important factor in reducing the anxieties that she feels, the over obsession with certain elements of she's a pediatric nurse, actually, and I would say that it can be very, very good. But I would advise that people with neurodiversity seek somebody who's very well qualified, insured, and equipped to deal with particular client groups. Because, of course, as with midwifery, there are lots of specialisms within hypnotherapy as well. And I think it's quite important to find the right person for you. You know, it's a bit like going for counselling. If you don't have the right person, you don't resonate with them, then it's more difficult and less effective. So that would be my advice if it's for people who are, neurodivergent in some way. Yeah.
Well, that's really interesting to think that would be, because you might think you should be excluded because it might be too much messing with people's minds. I mean,
Not necessarily. I mean, there will be a few. If their condition is not well managed at that particular time for some reason, then it wouldn't be appropriate. In the same way as you wouldn't work with people with addictions or major issues like that. And on the point of addictions, the problem is you can replace the sense of euphoria that they get from drugs or alcohol or whatever with a similar sense of euphoria from the hypnosis. And therefore, you're not actually treating their addiction, their addictive personality. You're just replacing one type of euphoria with another. So that's one of the reasons why you wouldn't work with people with addictions.
Wow. I have to say, I'm sort of thinking what a wonderful model it would be if each maternity unit had someone with both your expertise wheeled together, looking after people's well-being.
There's a business idea, Gina.
Yes. Well, I was thinking, Denise, I'd have you in my pocket just to check out things. It's interesting because thinking about a maternity unit and the complexity of the women and families, and then the complexity of the staff group that you have there, and taking Gina's kind of description of the Japanese model, I'm thinking it would be really quite interesting. And there may well be a head of service out there who might either be developing this or thinking about, but having somebody kind of tasked with looking after. I mean, I know that complementary therapies it's quite a popular area to look into, but it's the idea of something more integrated in a way.
Yeah, but it's interesting because when I was a student nurse in the 70s, I worked for a while on a maternity unit. I did my obstetric placement in a Christian hospital in North London. And every morning there were prayers on the wards. So everybody stood and had prayers. And it was just an opportunity to pause for a few moments. And we don't do that at all in current midwifery or nursing. And I think it doesn't really matter what it is. It's how you do it and whether you do it that's important. So whether it's something from Gina's experience and having retreats and things, or whether it's having complementary therapies, I think it will be different needs for different people as well.
But I'm thinking it's having someone in a unit thinking about that, isn't it? Thinking about the needs of all those different midwives and student midwives and care assistants and doctors even, because it's very stressful all the way through. And it sort of makes so much sense. And when Gina, you were talking about the Japanese model, I was thinking, well, we should be able to do something like that. Really.
I think it's really important. I think the elephant in the room as well is that if we look at all the midwife studies that have been done, like Billy Hunter's one about the Whelm, et al., the whole group about the Whelm study, and the Poppy study by Slade et al., and some work in Australia, which that they are doing quite a lot of, they're ahead of us, I think, in this way, then we can see that in some of those studies, the burnout level, self-reported burnout, was nearly 70% professional burnout of midwives. And so we actually do really need to have some interventions, and something like an app, and like Denise's, that something simple as self-hypnosis, like but there need to be spaces, don't there, in the ward. And going back to Cheryl's point as well, and her question. You know, the National Autistic Society has a special sort of link for autistic, for people who are neurodivergent in the workplace, because of course you are going to be probably experiencing burnout and stress more profoundly for the reasons that Denise was saying, with the extra stress and that sort of thing. So we do have to be cognizant of the whole of society. It's interesting that I did share an office with an e-rostering administrator when I was bunged into a cupboard after the proper office, no windows, nothing, just two desks, and it was really cramped and everything. But I was so humbled to hear how resilient the midwives were and what they were, the adversity they were actually experiencing. And they didn't moan, but they were asking for more flexible hours, and often the 12-hour shift just actually didn't work. You know, something has to give, doesn't it? So they were really sacrificing such a lot. You know, I take my hat off to, I really, if I hadn't shared an office, I probably wouldn't have known. So I was obviously very discreet and never shared that. But we have to be aware that some of these staff are the middle squeeze. They're sandwiched between, you know, very maybe sick relatives, parents, if they're alive, and, you know, youngsters with maybe anxiety disorders, and all of these things have to be factored in. So is e-rostering the right model at all? And I know some maternity units are actually using completely different models, like Sue Chatterley, which is
Yes,
wonderful to
yes.
see. Yeah.
Yeah, that's Greenwich, Lewisham. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it is difficult, because I think a lot of units have moved to the 12-hour shifts, and also moved away from having the handover time, which, I mean, Denise, you were talking about that beginning of the day and having prayers or just a few moments of reflection, and that handover period. And I guess we're showing our age here, audience. Remembering the time of coming in, and you had this chunk in the afternoon where you could do the things like sit down and discuss cases that had happened, have a little teach-in. We used to have a little teach-in with sister running that, or just time to think or reflect on things, and then of course, the only thing about, because we're old, in the olden days, we didn't necessarily know it was called reflection. We didn't call it reflection. And you know, we've probably much more skilled at it now, but it's something that's lacking. And when you were talking, Gina, earlier about being being stuck in a cupboard, I kind of remembered one of the things that happened during COVID, and this is what makes me sad. We need to have learned something from COVID. We had the wobble rooms, or the little rooms where people could go and have a cup when they were finding it all too much, go and have a cup of tea, just take a breather. I don't think they're there now. And why aren't they? We should be looking after each other in that way. I'll get off my soapbox, get on my soapbox.
Oh, I think we're all on it with you, actually, Sue.
But where could, I mean, if it's down, and Gina, you did that so colourfully, this being put in a cupboard, because I think that has happened to a lot of people. There's just no space in the unit. So why aren't there any spaces? How could we get a space? Would that make a difference? Did you find in your kind of looking at the Japanese models that they had additional space apart from that lovely tea room picture?
Yeah, I think there's just more emphasis on support, and actually being in a cupboard on all of that takes away from it. Was actually a fantastic, it's just 2 years, but it was really, I'm so glad I went back to practice, and the team support was just amazing. So you can actually tolerate quite a lot. So when you step back out and you just think, actually, it's not acceptable to treat people like that when they're, you know, there were 30 women on the ward, postnatal ward, 30 babies, and that's a lot. And some of the staff, they'd be crying a couple of times when I walked on. I came in sometimes on days off just to do, I don't know, training prep and stuff. And one time, two midwives, senior midwives, one was probably mid-career and the other one was senior. They're both the other side of a wall, sobbing. and I thought something awful had happened. So I just said, is everything okay? What's happened? And they just, the senior ones, I went to her first and she just said, it's relentless. It's relentless. We can't cope. All the staff were on a don't know, conflict resolution day, hilariously.
Oh,
And then, and I was really sort of, I just was
Ironic.
shocked. I know it's hilarious. I was actually shocked. And then the mid-career midwife said, I just don't feel like a midwife anymore. And so I said, right, we're having a huddle. And they said, we haven't got time for a huddle. So I said, we are having a huddle. It's in your
oh
interest.
wow.
So we had a huddle and I just had to say, right, do you want me to, I said, what are the priorities? Would you like me to manage the ward today for you, or would you like me to just do the obs? Anyway, I did them so slowly, they never asked me again because I was asking all the women about their feeding. But the atmosphere just lifted because they just felt someone sort of, I just cared. I didn't, I didn't do anything major at all. But that was, if someone hadn't been there, and how would it look to the women to walk in and see the staff just literally in tears, and this sort of relentless the word relentless just bothers me because it shouldn't be like that. So we need better spaces. We need to have a culture that's very sort of welcoming of power naps, taking breaks, coming back refreshed so that we're not missing things. And all these, you mentioned Ockenden earlier. Well, how awful, 2,000 families have come forward in one setting, that's very disturbing. That's an awful lot, isn't it? That we've become a little bit
Yes.
desensitized in some way.
But I wonder if you asked the midwives and student midwives with the same kind of review investigation, what their perceptions of their own experiences would be. Because so in some of those cases, it's possible that women didn't get that chance to reflect and kind of offload and have things explained to them properly. And sometimes that will happen because when the staff are frantically busy and in this relentless hamster wheel that people are on. I think
Yeah.
it was
It's interesting. You're talking about space in Japan, though. They have a lot of space outside. It's a big country, but inside they don't. They actually have very small rooms, and they're not cramped, but they are full. And yet what they do manage to create, and I think it's important, links back to what Gina's just said, is something about an emotional space and a space that permits you to have a few minutes of reflection or a huddle or whatever it might be. And this relentlessness, I am worried by it too, because there is no time even to go to the toilet. And we know that the RCM did a study and found that a large percentage of midwives never get time to go to the toilet. Well, that's a fundamental human right. But when it comes to stress and mental well-being, which can't necessarily be seen, we're really bad as a nation, I think, actually, at creating that emotional space that says it's okay to feel like this for this period of time. Then we will go on and see whether we can resolve it in some way or minimize it in some way. And so I think emotional space for relaxation is really important.
Yeah, I'm going to return to that in a second. I've got now Cheryl. This is 3 times, Cheryl. You're doing fab. She says, I think it's a real worry of students and newly qualified midwives that they worry about the burnout. And that's a good point. Thank you,
Yes,
Cheryl.
it is.
And then Wendy Bannister. Hi, Wendy. Wendy says, I think it's very difficult and takes great courage to say you're not okay and feel stressed, tired out, and without feeling it's a weakness. And that is also true, Wendy. Very true. But I think what I'm taking out of this, and I always say this is the fastest hour in the week. It really is. But the things that I've taken out is that, and I'm going to reiterate the emotional space, because I think that's a point both of you have made in different ways. And the kind of family, what I'm feeling from the discussion that we've had this evening is very much how you're in a family, you look after each other, hopefully.
Yeah.
And you look out for each other. And if you're a happy family, you can cope with almost anything by doing that. And even when you have a time of stress, you work together, and the family of midwives, and that's one of the things I know Denise and Gina and I would treasure, being in the family of midwives. It's very special. It's a smaller family than the nurses, but it's a very special family. And I want to thank Denise and Gina for coming
Thank
along
you.
this evening and sharing their expertise. We'll have to have them back. We must.
We would love it.
Fabulous.
Thank you.
And you've
Thank
got
you.
and thank you so much also, Denise, for making an offer for anyone who's interested in the self-hypnosis program, because I know your programs are often very, I'm going to say it's a bit like Last Lobster, this, because they're often very full, because people really enjoy what you do. And
Thank you.
once you've been taught by Denise, you know it's, you know, proper, you have the proper evidence, you know your parameters. And that's really important in something that in the past was thought to be a bit floaty.
Yeah.
I think I might be right.
Still is sometimes.
Yeah.
Not with me though. Not with me.
No, because that's one of the things that gives, I think, gives us as practitioners a feeling of safety. You know what you're meant to do and what you can't do and what you need to be careful about.
Yeah.
So thank you so much to both of you. Now I'm
Thank
going to
you.
say also thanks to Angelo, who's making sure it's all recorded beautifully. So if you did get a power cut, you can catch up. But if you had a power cut, you wouldn't know that I'm saying that. Anyway, that's another story. Thanks also to Paul for looking after and sending the comments and questions through to me. Now, this is going to be available on Friday as a podcast at 6 o'clock in the morning. And I know there's a whole chunk of people who like to listen to this at 6 o'clock in the morning. But it'll also be available on the newsletter on Tuesday. So if you haven't signed up with the Maternity Midwifery Forum newsletter, do so, because you get fantastic things, because people like Denise, people like Gina write little articles, and they're really thought-provoking and really information-packed, well worth reading. So sign up if you haven't signed up. And also don't forget to book for the Midlands Festival on the 20th of May. You might see someone like Denise there, I think. And we've got some places and we've got some fantastic speakers, and I'm still thinking emotional space and family here. It's all in my brain going on. Next week we're going to be looking at midwives and nurse midwives identity with Sally Pizarro. At same time, same place. And in the meantime, take care of yourselves. And I'm underlining that from Denise and from Gina. And we'll see you next week. Take care.